There is a city whose name echoes across millennia, a name that outlived kings, emperors, tyrants, and popes, a name written into the laws, languages, roads, and ruins of our world today. Rome. But before it became an empire, it was a village. Before legions, there were farmers. Before emperors, there were shepherds. And a wolf. The story of Rome begins not with fact, but with legend. A story passed from mouth to mouth, carved into stone, whispered by poets. According to the myth, the god of war, Mars, fathered two sons, Romulus and Remus. Their mother, a Vestal virgin named Rhea Silvia, was forced into silence. The twins, condemned to die, were cast into the Tiber River. But fate intervened. The boys were carried ashore, found by a she-wolf, and suckled in a cave beneath the Palatine Hill. Later, they were raised by a shepherd and grew into bold, defiant young men. In time, they chose to found a city, but pride got in the way. Romulus and Remus quarreled over where to build and who would rule. Romulus struck first, killing his brother in a moment of fury. He named the city after himself, Roma. The year, by Roman tradition, was 753 BCE. A city born in blood, a sign of things to come. The early Romans were not unique, just one of many Latin tribes in central Italy. They lived in huts, herded sheep, and farmed the land. But their city sat at a crossroads of trade, river, and hill, easy to defend, easy to grow. Over time, they came under the rule of kings, 7 in all, according to legend. Some were Latin, some were Sabine, and the last few were Etruscans, a neighboring civilization to the north. These kings brought structure to Rome. They built temples, walls, and even the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, still in use today. But kingship was a double-edged sword. The last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was hated for his arrogance. He ruled without consent, bypassed the Senate, and filled Rome with fear. When his son, Sextus Tarquinius, assaulted a noblewoman named Lucretia, the outrage shattered Rome's patience. She took her own life, and the city erupted in revolt. Led by a nobleman named Lucius Junius Brutus, the Romans swore an oath. Never again would they bow to a king. In 509 BCE, Rome became a republic, a res publica, a public affair. Power was placed into the hands of 2 elected consuls, chosen annually, who ruled together. The Senate, made up of patricians, the aristocratic elite, advised them. And the Roman citizen, at least the male landowner, had the right to vote. It was no democracy by modern standards, but for its time, it was revolutionary. But the new republic was fragile. Its system was designed to prevent tyranny, so much so that it often paralyzed itself. The consuls could veto each other. The Senate could stall decisions. In times of crisis, Rome could appoint a dictator, but only for 6 months. And all the while, one truth became obvious. The republic worked best for the rich. The plebeians, the commoners, had little say. No access to high office, no protections from the law. They paid taxes, they fought in wars, but their voices went unheard. So they resisted, peacefully, powerfully. They marched out of the city and camped on a hill outside Rome, refusing to return until they were granted representation. This secession of the plebs shocked the Senate. Without its workers and soldiers, Rome was vulnerable. So they compromised. The office of tribune was created, an official who could veto any law on behalf of the plebeians. Later, laws were inscribed publicly in the Forum, the 12 Tables. Crude, even brutal, these laws were a step toward equality. Everyone, patrician or pleb, could now know their rights and their punishments. While Rome fought for balance at home, it fought for dominance abroad. At first, it faced its neighbors, the Latins, the Sabines, the Aequi. These were small wars, but each one taught Rome something new. Then came the Samnites, a fierce hill people to the south. Rome would fight 3 long wars against them over nearly 50 years. The Samnite Wars were brutal. Rome suffered defeats, but it always adapted. It reorganized its legions, restructured its roads, and made alliances that turned enemies into citizens. Unlike other ancient empires, Rome didn't just conquer. It absorbed. Defeated cities were often offered citizenship, or at least a path to it. In return, they gave troops and taxes. This created a network of loyalty that spread across Italy. By the middle of the 3rd century BCE, Rome had extended its rule from the Apennines to the coasts of Sicily. Greek colonies in the south, Etruscan cities in the north, all were now part of Rome's growing sphere. Rome had grown from a village of shepherds to the dominant power on the Italian peninsula. Its roads stretched hundreds of miles, connecting allies and garrisons. Its soldiers marched with discipline, armed with the gladius and the rectangular shield. Its laws, though flawed, gave structure. Its republic, though fragile, gave direction. But across the sea, a rival was watching. A trading empire built on wealth, ships, and silver. Its name was Carthage, and soon the two would clash in a conflict that would last over a century. The stage was set. The Republic was strong, but not invincible. Its people were divided, but loyal. Its ambitions were growing. And so ends the first chapter in the story of Rome. From myth to monarchy, from monarchy to republic, from a single hill to the gates of the Mediterranean world. By the late 3rd century, Rome dominated the Italian peninsula, but beyond its shores lay a powerful rival, Carthage. Located in North Africa, Carthage was a maritime empire. It controlled trade across the western Mediterranean. Its wealth came from silver, slaves, and spices. Its navy, vast and unmatched. The two powers had coexisted, but their ambitions soon collided. In a small island caught between them: Sicily. What began as a local dispute escalated into a war for control of the Mediterranean. The First Punic War lasted over 2 decades, mostly at sea. Rome, with no naval tradition, had to build a fleet from scratch. It learned by failing, then adapted. They invented a boarding device called the corvus, turning sea battles into infantry combat. With it, Roman soldiers stormed Carthaginian ships like floating fortresses. In 241 BCE, Carthage surrendered Sicily. Rome had won its first overseas province, but Carthage would strike back. And this time, through one of the greatest generals in history, Hannibal Barca. In 218 BCE, he led an army from Spain across the Alps into Italy. With him came war elephants, cavalry, and hardened veterans. The journey was brutal: freezing winds, collapsing paths, mountain tribes. Hannibal lost half his force before even reaching Roman soil. But once in Italy, Hannibal stunned the Romans. At the Battle of Cannae, he encircled and destroyed an army twice the size of his own. It was one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history. Nearly 50,000 Romans lay dead. The Republic trembled. But Rome did not surrender. It refused peace. It bled, but endured. As Hannibal ravaged Italy, Rome struck back elsewhere. A young general named Scipio led a bold campaign in Spain, cutting off Carthage's lifelines. Scipio was brilliant, charismatic, and relentless. He took Carthaginian strongholds one by one, turning Spain Roman. In 202 BCE, Scipio and Hannibal met at Zama in North Africa. It was a clash of titans, 2 brilliant minds, 2 exhausted empires. Rome won. Hannibal was defeated. Carthage surrendered its fleet, its army, and its pride. Rome was now the undisputed power of the Western Mediterranean. Victory came at a cost. Rome had tasted global war, and it changed the Republic forever. Wealth poured in from conquered lands. Slaves flooded the markets. Senators grew rich from provincial contracts. But the gap between rich and poor widened. Latifundia, vast estates owned by elites, swallowed up small farms. Veterans returned to find their land sold or seized. With conquest came culture. Rome absorbed Greek science, art, and philosophy. Educated Greek slaves became tutors to Roman children. Sculptors and architects reshaped Roman cities in marble and myth. The old Roman virtues, discipline, simplicity, service, faced a new world of luxury, intellect, and foreign gods. By 200 BCE, Rome stood tall, but tension grew within. The Republic had conquered Carthage, Spain, Sicily, but now it would face its greatest enemy, itself. Ambition, inequality, and corruption stirred beneath the surface, and in the years ahead, civil war would rise from within the walls of victory. Rome had conquered its enemies, but victory bred new threats from within. The Senate grew wealthier. the poor grew angrier. Soldiers returned from war with no land, no pensions, and no voice. Meanwhile, ambitious men saw the cracks in the Republic and prepared to exploit them. In 133 BCE, a young tribune named Tiberius Gracchus proposed land reform, breaking up elite estates to give land to veterans. The Senate was outraged. They accused him of tyranny. He was killed, beaten to death by a mob of senators. A decade later, his brother Gaius tried again, with broader reforms. He too was driven to suicide by the Senate's fury. The message was clear. The Republic could no longer handle dissent. Reform meant violence. Change meant blood. Then came Gaius Marius. A self-made man, he reformed the Roman army, recruiting landless citizens and promising them land in return for service. For the first time, Roman soldiers were loyal not to the Senate, but to their general. It was the beginning of a new Rome, one where power followed the sword. Marius's rival, Sulla, took things even further. In 88 BCE, when the Senate tried to strip him of command, he marched his legions into Rome itself. For the first time, Roman soldiers invaded their own capital. Sulla declared himself dictator, not for 6 months, but indefinitely. He killed his enemies, rewrote the laws, and then, strangely, resigned. But the Republic wasn't healed. It only waited for its next strong man, and his name was Julius Caesar. Charismatic, brilliant, ruthless, he conquered Gaul, became beloved by his troops, and feared by the Senate. In 49 BCE, when ordered to step down, Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army. It was an act of war, and he never looked back. Caesar defeated his enemies, declared himself dictator for life, and reshaped Rome in his image. He reformed the calendar, gave citizenship to the provinces, and packed the Senate with allies. But to the old guard, he had gone too far. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar was stabbed to death by senators, some of them his friends. They thought they were saving the Republic. Instead, they ended it. Chaos followed. Civil war swept the Republic again. Caesar's allies, Mark Antony and Octavian, hunted down the assassins. But even they turned on each other. At Actium, in 31 BCE, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra in a decisive naval battle. The Republic was over. What came next was empire. Octavian returned to Rome and became Augustus, the first emperor. He kept the Senate, the laws, the appearances of the Republic, but held all real power. Under Augustus, Rome entered a new age, an age of peace, prosperity, and power, the Pax Romana. When Augustus took power, Rome was exhausted, battered by civil wars, betrayal, and blood. He promised stability and delivered it. The army was professionalized. The provinces were organized. Corruption was punished. Roads, aqueducts, and temples were built anew. But above all, Augustus gave Rome an illusion that the Republic still lived. For the next 2 centuries, Rome enjoyed relative peace and prosperity, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Trade flourished from Britain to Syria. Grain ships fed the cities. Merchants, soldiers, and ideas moved freely along the Roman roads. In this era, the empire reached its cultural and architectural heights. To live in Rome was to live in a city of over 1 million people, crowded, chaotic, alive. There were senators and slaves, gladiators and bakers, philosophers and engineers. The poor lived in insulae, fragile wooden apartments. The rich dined in marble villas with mosaics and fountains. In the evenings, crowds filled the baths, the taverns, and, of course, the arena. But the real backbone of Rome was its army. Legions guarded borders from the Danube to the Euphrates. They built roads, forts, bridges, bringing Roman order wherever they went. A Roman soldier could be born in Gaul, serve in Judea, and retire in North Africa. After Augustus came emperors of every kind, madmen, visionaries, tyrants. But for nearly a century, Rome was ruled by a golden chain, the 5 good emperors. Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, each chosen not by blood, but by merit. They expanded the empire, reformed the laws, built monuments that still stand today. Under Trajan, Rome reached its greatest size, stretching from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf. His successor, Hadrian, changed course. He built walls, not roads. He knew an empire can collapse from overreach. Hadrian's wall still stands today, marking Rome's northern frontier in Britain. The last of the 5 was Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher king who ruled with wisdom, even as war returned to the frontiers. He wrote meditations in his tent, reflecting on duty, fate, and virtue. But his reign was the last breath of the Golden Age, because his son was Commodus. Commodus was vain, erratic, and cruel. He fought as a gladiator in the arena. He saw himself as a god. And when he died, in 192 CE, he left behind a Rome fractured in spirit, still vast, still rich, but less certain than before. The Golden Age was over. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire nearly collapsed. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, some ruling for mere months before being assassinated. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors came and went. Civil war was constant. Plague and inflation ravaged the land. The empire fractured into 3 parts. Barbarians raided the borders. Rome, once eternal, seemed on the edge of ruin. Most emperors now came from the army, tough, capable men who fought their way to the throne. But they ruled on borrowed time. They fought battles abroad and against each other. It was a time of armor, ambition, and instability. The Roman world survived only by momentum and habit. Then came Aurelian, the restorer of the world. In just 5 years, he defeated breakaway empires in Gaul and the East, pushed back barbarian invasions, and rebuilt the city walls of Rome. For a moment, the empire was whole again, but not for long. In 284, Diocletian took the throne and did what no one before him had dared. He divided the empire. He created the tetrarchy, rule of 4, with 2 senior emperors and 2 juniors, each governing a region. He reorganized the army, stabilized the currency, and brought order through sheer control. But his system depended on cooperation, and emperors do not always share power. After Diocletian, civil war returned, but from the chaos rose a single victor, Constantine. He defeated his rivals and reunified the empire under one rule. In 312, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he claimed to see a vision, a cross in the sky, and the words, "In this sign, conquer." After his victory, Constantine embraced Christianity, and the world would never be the same. In 330, Constantine founded a new capital in the east, on the site of Byzantium. He called it Constantinople. It stood at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, trade and empire. With mighty walls and golden domes, it would outlast Rome itself. The empire now had 2 hearts, Rome and Constantinople, and in time, they would grow apart. Though the empire seemed restored, shadows gathered on the horizon. The West grew weaker, drained by wars, corruption, and debt. The East grew stronger, richer, more stable, better defended. Barbarian tribes gathered at the borders. Some came to trade, some to serve, others to conquer. The stage was set for the final act of the Western Roman Empire. By the middle of the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self. The economy had crumbled. The army relied on mercenaries. Emperors were puppets, placed on the throne by generals or barbarian warlords. In the east, Constantinople stood strong, but in the west, Rome was dying. In the year 410, a thunderclap echoed across the Roman world. For the first time in 8 centuries, Rome had been sacked. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, marched through the gates and plundered the Eternal City. Though the building stood, the illusion was shattered. Rome was no longer invincible. And then came the Huns, riders from the steppes of Central Asia, led by the fearsome Attila. In the 440 S, they ravaged the Balkans, marched through Gaul, and threatened the heart of Italy. Only a meeting with Pope Leo I stopped their advance. How, no one knows. But Attila turned back, a brief breath, before the end. The final blow came in the year 476. A barbarian general named Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus. He sent the imperial regalia east to Constantinople. The message was clear. The Western Empire no longer existed. No grand battle, no final stand, just the end. But Rome did not die. In the East, the Roman Empire lived on for 1,000 more years. We call it the Byzantine Empire. Its people called it simply Roman. It had Greek language, Christian faith, Roman law, and at its height under Justinian, it reclaimed parts of the lost West. Its capital, Constantinople, would not fall until 1453, nearly a millennium after Rome itself. So, what remains of Rome? Its law, the foundation of many legal systems today. Its language, the root of Italian, French, Spanish, and more. Its architecture, arches, domes, and roads still standing after 2,000 years. Its idea that a republic or an empire could rule not just by force, but by vision. Rome was born from blood and legend. It rose through discipline, law, and ambition. It fell through pride, corruption, and overreach. But its shadow never left us. We still walk its roads, speak its words, live in the world it helped shape. This was the story of Rome, not just of a city, not just of an empire, but of an idea, too powerful to die. And so ends the final chapter in the story of Rome. From myth to empire, from empire to legacy. Rome lives on in us, in our laws, in our language, in our minds. Rome never truly fell. It just transformed.